who took an 84-year-old woman in the dead of night in her pajamas with no shoes, without her medicine. Her phone was there and her purse was there and all her things, and the doors were propped open.
Yeah.
And there was blood on the front doorstep. And the Ring camera had been yanked off.
Yeah.
I think my brother, he said, I think she's been kidnapped for ransom. I didn't want to believe. I just said, because of me. To think that I brought this to her bedside, just too much to bear. And I just say, I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry.
They said one word that changed everything. When something is an accident, nobody planned it. When something is random, nobody picked you. But when someone is hired, that means there was a meeting. There was a deal. There was money that moved from one hand to another. And somewhere in the middle of that deal, a name was given. Nancy Ellen Guthrie, 84 years old. A woman who had lived in Tucson, Arizona for more than 50 years. A woman who raised 3 children. A woman who went to church every Sunday morning, who loved her family, who had already lived a full, quiet, beautiful life. She was not powerful. She was not a president. She was not a CEO. She was not protected by bodyguards or walls or gates with cameras. She was a grandmother, and someone chose her anyway. That is the part that stops you cold, isn't it? Not just that she was taken, but that someone, somewhere, sat down and made a decision. They looked at options. They considered the risk. They weighed the cost. And at the end of all that thinking, they pointed at an 84-year-old woman living quietly in the hills outside Tucson, Arizona. How did they know where she lived? How did they know her routine? How did they know when to come and when the street would be dark and quiet? You do not know those things about a stranger. You only know those things if someone told you. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nano stood in front of cameras and said the words clearly. We believe we know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted. Targeted. Not random, not a mistake, not a wrong house, wrong night. Targeted. And if it was targeted, then someone did the targeting. Someone had the information. Someone sold the map. And if a map was sold, then this story is not just about the person who came through the front door in the dark. This story is about who opened that door. The FBI got involved. U.S. Customs and Border Protection got involved. Search and rescue teams, forensic analysts. Hundreds of investigators across multiple agencies, all of them chasing one woman who vanished into the Arizona night. Ransom notes demanding millions of dollars were sent not to the family, but to media outlets. Images emerged of a masked, armed man at her front door in the dark hours of the morning. And still, as of today, Nancy Guthrie has not come home. This is her story. This is the story of what was planned, what was sold, and what investigators are still hunting in the dark. My name is Joe, and this is the targeted one. It was a Saturday evening, January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie had spent the evening doing what she loved most, eating dinner with her family, playing games, laughing. Just a grandmother enjoying a normal Saturday night with the people she loved. At 9:48 inches the evening, her family dropped her off at her home in the Catalina foothills, a quiet neighborhood outside Tucson, Arizona. They watched her go inside. They drove away. And that was the last time any of them would see her. Now, here is the first thing you need to understand about that night. Nancy was not young. She had a pacemaker. She had high blood pressure and heart issues. She needed medicine every single day to stay alive. She could not walk 50 yards by herself. This was not a woman who could run. This was not a woman who could fight. This was not a woman who could escape on her own. Whoever came for her that night knew that. They chose her anyway. The next morning was Sunday, February 1st, and Nancy Guthrie did not show up for church. Now, if you know anything about Nancy Guthrie, you know that meant something was wrong. She had lived in the Tucson area for more than 5 decades. She was a woman of deep faith and routine. Missing church was not something Nancy did. At 11:56 the morning, her relatives came to her home to check on her and discovered she was gone. At 12:03 p.m., the family called 911. That was when everything began. Within hours, deputies arrived and began a search. Authorities conducted an extensive ground and aerial search using dogs, drones, helicopters, and infrared technology. Neighbors stood on their porches, confused, watching law enforcement pour into their quiet neighborhood. And then the sheriff walked outside, stood in front of cameras, and said what nobody was ready to hear. At this point, investigators believe she was taken from her home against her will, possibly in the middle of the night. Against her will, he continued. She couldn't walk 50 yards by herself. Let that sit for a moment. Someone came into that house, in the middle of the night, and physically carried away an 84-year-old woman who could not even walk across the street on her own. This was not a crime of confusion. This was not a mistake. This was a mission. Now, here is where the story gets cold in a very specific way. Nancy's home had a Google Nest doorbell camera at the front door. It should have recorded everything, and investigators found footage, but not the kind that gave them comfort. In the footage from the Nest doorbell camera, a man appeared at Nancy Guthrie's front door. He was wearing a face mask, gloves, and a black Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed the potential subject was armed. But here is the detail that stopped investigators in their tracks. The camera had been tampered with. 4 images depicted a person wearing gloves, a mask, and a backpack appearing to tamper with the camera at Nancy Guthrie's front door the morning she disappeared. One theory that emerged was that the suspect had approached the door the first time, noticed the camera, and was scared off only to return later. When he tampered with the device and put branches in front of the lens. He came once, he saw the camera. He left. Then he came back, and he dealt with the camera before he went inside. Think about that for a moment. Nervous people run away when they see a camera. They go home. They abandon the plan. This person did not abandon the plan. This person adapted. That is not panic. That is training. That is someone who had thought about obstacles in advance, who had a backup response ready, and who was willing to return to the scene after already being caught on film. On February 12th, authorities released additional details about the suspected kidnapper's appearance, including an estimated height of 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, an average build, and a black mustache. Average, ordinary looking. The kind of person you would walk past in a grocery store and never remember. That, too, is a choice. The sheriff confirmed that blood found on the porch belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Her blood, on her own front porch. He would not say if blood was found anywhere else on the property. That silence told its own story. Additional DNA evidence found at Nancy's home was also being analyzed. And then, within days, came another disturbing development. Something that shifted this story from a local missing person case into something that made the entire country pay attention. Multiple ransom notes of undetermined origin demanded payment in cryptocurrency. 2 deadlines passed by February 9th. But here is the part that matters most, the part that is easy to miss if you are not paying attention. Those ransom notes were not sent to the family. On February 2nd, KOLD-TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, reported that it had received a letter demanding payment for Nancy's release. A purported ransom note sent to KGUN demanded $6 million by 5 p.m. and included a threat on her life. $6 million, sent to a TV station, not to her children, not to her daughter, one of the most famous news anchors in America, but to a local television station in Tucson, Arizona. Why? Normal kidnappers go straight to the family. They want money fast. They want a direct line. They want silence. This note went to the press first. Why would someone trying to quietly collect ransom money announce themselves to the entire world? Either this person was very new to this, or this note was never really about the money at all. And that question, what is this really about, is the question that every investigator in that 24-hour command post in Tucson is still trying to answer today. Now, this is the part of the story where most people first learned about Nancy Guthrie. Because Nancy's daughter is not an ordinary person. Nancy is the mother of NBC News journalist and Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces on American morning television. Savannah stepped away from her NBC duties, which were to include co-hosting the opening ceremonies of the 2026 Winter Olympics, to participate in the ongoing search for her mother. Yahoo! Savannah Guthrie spoke directly to the camera in an emotional Instagram video, asking the public for help. "We are at an hour of desperation, and we need your help. We believe our mom is still out there. She was taken, and we don't know where, and we need your help." And the family did something else, something brave and heartbreaking at the same time. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings posted a video to social media saying they had received a message and were willing to pay the ransom. "We received your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay," they said. A daughter, on her knees in front of the whole world, begging. And still, as of today, as of March 25, 2026, Nancy Guthrie has not been located, and the investigation remains ongoing. But here is what investigators quietly understand, what the evidence quietly screams, even when the officials speak carefully in front of cameras. This was not random. This was not an accident. Sheriff Nano said investigators believe they know why the home was targeted. And if they know why it was targeted, they know something more important than that. They know this required inside knowledge. Someone knew her address. Someone knew her routine. Someone knew she came home at 9:48 that Saturday night. Someone knew the layout of that house well enough to move through it in the dark. Find a woman who could not walk on her own, and disappear into the desert night without a single witness. That knowledge does not come from Google. That knowledge comes from someone who was already close. Within hours of the first 911 call, the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson looked like a different place entirely. Deputies arrived and began an extensive ground and aerial search using dogs, drones, helicopters, and infrared technology. Neighbors stood behind yellow tape and watched. Children pressed their faces against windows. And somewhere in all that noise and movement, investigators were quietly doing the thing that matters most in the first 48 hours of a missing persons case. They were building a timeline, not a story, not a theory, a timeline, because a timeline does not lie. A timeline does not forget details. A timeline shows you exactly where the holes are, the spaces where something happened but nobody was watching. And this timeline had a very specific shape. 5:32 inches the evening. Nancy Guthrie left her home in an Uber to go to her daughter Annie's house for dinner and games with the family. She was happy. She was loved. She was spending her Saturday exactly the way a grandmother should spend a Saturday. 9:48 inches the night. Nancy was dropped back home. The garage door opened at that time, and it closed 2 minutes later. She was inside. She was safe, at least for that moment. 1:47 inches the morning. Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera disconnected. That is less than 4 hours after she came home. Less than 4 hours between safe and gone. Think about what happens in those 4 hours. Nancy probably made a cup of tea. She probably sat down. Maybe she watched a little television. Maybe she said her prayers and got ready for bed. She had no reason in the world to think that anything was wrong. She had no reason to be afraid. But someone outside was already moving. Here is the detail that investigators did not release right away. The detail that, once you hear it, changes everything about how you see this crime. The photos and video released by the FBI were taken on 2 different days. The masked suspect is not wearing a backpack in one of the images, and ABC News reported the suspect appears to have been at her door before February 1st. Before February 1st. He came once before the night he took her. He stood at her door. He looked at the camera. He left. And then he went away, made a plan, gathered his equipment, and came back. Investigators now believe the suspect may have visited Nancy Guthrie's home on multiple occasions. CNN's Ed Lavandera noted this might help explain why investigators appear so focused on the weeks before her abduction. The weeks before. That is where the story really lives. Not the night of February 1st. The days and weeks that came before it. The phone calls. The conversations. The information that traveled from one person to another like a whisper moving through a dark room. Because here is what you need to understand. You do not just show up at someone's house twice in a ski mask without knowing something about them first. You know what time they usually come home. You know whether they live alone. You know whether there is staff in the house. You know whether there are dogs, or alarm systems, or neighbors who stay up late. You know all of that because someone told you. January 11th, the Pima County Sheriff's Office made a specific and unusual request to the public. They asked people to search their memories, especially around the key timelines of January 31 and the early morning hours of February 1, as well as the late evening of January 11. International Business Times January 11th. That is 3 weeks before the abduction. 3 weeks before anyone knew anything was wrong. 3 weeks before the whole country would learn Nancy Guthrie's name. Why would investigators care about a date 3 weeks earlier? Because something happened on January 11th. They have not told the public exactly what. But you do not put a date like that in a public statement unless it matters. You do not ask the whole city of Tucson to think back to a random Thursday night in January unless something moved on that night, something that started the clock ticking. A car parked on the street that was not normally there. A phone call, made from a number that does not belong to the neighborhood. A person walking where people do not usually walk after dark. Something happened on January 11th, and investigators believe that somewhere out there, someone saw it. Now here is where true crime fans lean forward in their seats, because this is the part of the investigation that looked, for a brief moment, like a breakthrough. A glove was found near Nancy Guthrie's home that appeared to match those worn by the suspect captured on doorbell camera footage. The FBI said it was one of approximately 16 gloves investigators found near the home, most of which belonged to searchers who discarded them while working in the area. But this particular glove found about 2 miles from the house appeared to visually match. Yahoo! Investigators rushed it to the lab. They extracted DNA. They ran it through CODIS, the FBI's national database that holds the genetic profiles of over 19 million people. The DNA on the gloves did not match any entries in the FBI's national genetic database. No match. And then even worse, DNA analysis of the glove led back to a local restaurant worker who is not connected to the case. Yahoo! The wrong person's DNA. On a glove that looked exactly right. That is the cruelty of forensic investigation. Evidence that looks perfect can point you in entirely the wrong direction. But here is what investigators did not do. They did not stop. Investigators said they also recovered DNA from Guthrie's property that does not match Nancy or anyone close to her. Although they have not disclosed where on the property the DNA was found, they confirmed they are still working to find a match. News Nation someone else's DNA, on her property, from someone who has no business being there. And then investigators took a step that signals they are serious, deeply, quietly, patiently serious. Investigators turned to genetic genealogy. The sheriff said, "We believe that we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect. But we won't know that until that DNA is separated, sorted out. Maybe admitted to CODIS, maybe through genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy. That is the same science that caught the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. It works like this. Even if the suspect has never given their DNA to a database, A cousin might have. A grandmother might have. A sibling who used one of those mail-in DNA kits. And if one family member is in the database, investigators can climb the family tree and work their way down until they find the right person. It is slow, it is careful, and it almost always works. Now, let's talk about the people authorities looked at. Because this case produced something unusual. Not one dramatic arrest, not one obvious suspect marched out in handcuffs. Instead, a series of very public leads that each went quiet in a way that felt heavy and deliberate. The delivery driver. Law enforcement detained a person for questioning after pulling them over at a traffic stop in Rio Rico, about an hour's drive south of Tucson, near the U.S. border with Mexico. The man, who identified himself as Carlos, told reporters, "I told them I might have delivered a package to their house, but I never kidnapped anybody." He was released. Investigators searched his home and found nothing to connect him to Nancy Guthrie. The second man, a lawyer representing a convicted felon, said his client and his client's mother were briefly detained as part of the investigation. The lawyer confirmed his client, who had previously served time in state prison on drug-related charges, was the target of a joint operation by the FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department. But he reiterated neither the man nor his mother were arrested and said they have no link to Guthrie. 2 people questioned, 2 people released. As the search stretched into its 3rd week, investigators still had no leading theory about what happened to Nancy, a source told CNN. Authorities were continuing to look at all options, including a burglary gone wrong, a targeted abduction based on Guthrie's famous daughter, or other possibilities. And then the FBI said something that made everything more complicated. FBI Director Kash Patel told Fox News that agents are looking at more than one individual as a person of interest. "We are looking at people who, as we say, are persons of interest," Patel said, adding that authorities were working through a process of elimination. More than one. Not a lone wolf, not a single desperate person who saw an opportunity and grabbed it. Investigators did not rule out the possibility that more than one person may have been involved in Nancy Guthrie's abduction. A team, a coordinated operation, people with roles, the one who got the information, the one who did the planning, the one who came through the door. Which brings us back to the one question that keeps every investigator awake at night. All members of the Guthrie family were cleared as suspects, Sheriff Nano said on February 16th. In a statement, the Pima County Sheriff said the family had been cleared, and that, to suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel. The family is innocent, that is not a question. But clearing the family does not make the case easier. In some ways, it makes it harder. Because if the family did not give out the information, if nobody in that circle of trust handed over the address, the routine, the schedule, then who did? And how did they know? A crime expert told PBS that this case did not feel like a garden-variety ransom kidnapping. If you're planning a kidnapping, you're already going to have those ransom channels set up, the expert said, noting that certain details made the case feel more like a premeditated crime of a different kind entirely. Premeditated, calculated, planned over days or weeks. And somewhere in those days and weeks, a piece of information traveled from someone who knew it to someone who needed it. That transfer, that moment when a name, an address, a schedule was handed over, is the moment that investigators are hunting for right now. Sheriff Nanos told NBC, "From day one we had some strong beliefs about what happened, and those beliefs haven't diminished." He did not say what those beliefs are. He did not need to, because the evidence has been saying it quietly all along. The repeated visits, the tampered camera, the disabled pacemaker connection, the ransom notes sent to the press. The DNA on the property that does not belong to anyone connected to Nancy. This is not chaos. This is not desperation. This is a plan. And plans come from people who had time, people who had access, people who were trusted. As of today, Sheriff Nano says investigators are definitely closer to identifying a suspect or suspects. A dedicated team from his department's homicide unit is working with the FBI, investigating the case under the presumption that Nancy Guthrie is still alive. NPR. They believe she is out there. They believe she is waiting. And somewhere, in a city or a neighborhood or a house that has not yet been named, the person who planned this is watching the news, checking for updates, measuring how much investigators know, wondering if the thing they thought was invisible is starting to show. Because here is what experienced investigators know about people who plan crimes like this. Nervous people hide what is right in front of them. They cover today and forget about yesterday. They delete the messages from last week but leave the ones from the week before. They move the money they got but forget about the money they spent to prepare. And that gap, the space between planning and doing, is exactly where investigators are looking now. Inside Nancy Guthrie's chest, a tiny machine the size of a $50 was doing something it has done every day for years without fail. It was sending a signal every 2 to 3 minutes. A small, quiet Bluetooth pulse. Not loud, not far-reaching. Just enough to connect to the app on Nancy's phone and say one simple thing. I am here. She is alive. The heart is beating. On the night of February 1st, that signal stopped. At 2:28 inches the morning, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from the app on her phone. The camera had already gone dark at 1:47 a.m., and at 2:12 a.m., a motion sensor detected a person, but there was no video to show who. News Nation. 41 minutes. That is how long it took, from the moment the camera went offline to the moment Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her phone. 41 minutes for someone to get inside, find an 84-year-old woman in the dark, and carry her far enough away that her heart monitor could no longer reach the phone sitting on her bedside table. But here is what that person did not know. They could not turn the pacemaker off. They could not remove it. It lives inside her chest, and it keeps sending its quiet signal whether they want it to or not. Because Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker is equipped with Bluetooth low-energy technology, a power setting designed so the device lasts for multiple years. Since the pacemaker sends out a Bluetooth signal every 2 to 3 minutes, the signal can be picked up by a device capable of locking onto its unique signal. And investigators built exactly that kind of device. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it is real, and it is flying over Tucson right now. Law enforcement began using a device known as a signal sniffer, a tool that uses an amplifier to find Bluetooth signals and identify the unique MAC address of Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. Using a directional antenna, software runs continuous scans, eliminating every other signal it encounters until it locks onto the right one. Think of it like this. Imagine you are standing in a crowded room where 100 radios are all playing different songs at the same time. Now imagine you have a pair of headphones that is programmed to hear only one specific song, one specific frequency that no other radio in the world plays. You put on those headphones and you walk through the crowd, and when that one song starts playing, your headphones light up and point you exactly to where it is coming from. That is what the signal sniffer does. The device was mounted on one of the skids of a Pima County Sheriff's Department helicopter, which flew slowly at a low altitude over the Tucson area. A former FBI special agent confirmed the agency is likely employing a variety of technology to find Nancy, noting that because the pacemaker sends off a very short-distance signal, investigators would need to get really close. David Kennedy, a former NSA hacker and the inventor of the signal sniffer being used in the investigation, confirmed that because of the pacemaker's Bluetooth low-energy technology, law enforcement would be able to track and trace it using Nancy Guthrie's phone. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker has 6 or 7 years of battery life remaining, and the manufacturer has been working with the FBI and engineers to help track signals from the device. 6 or 7 years. That pacemaker is not going to stop. That signal is not going to go silent. And as long as that signal keeps pulsing every 2 to 3 minutes, through walls, through darkness, through whatever place, Nancy Guthrie is being held. Investigators have a thread, a thin, quiet, electronic thread, and they are following it. Morgan Wright, the CEO and founder of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, told investigators, "The pacemaker is the most unbiased witness we have. Why? Because it's sending telemetry data. It generates all the additional events and actions from the behavior of that pacemaker." Yahoo! An unbiased witness. Unlike a human witness, the pacemaker cannot be scared into silence. It cannot be bribed. It cannot be threatened. It cannot forget. It cannot lie. It just keeps sending its signal, over and over, faithful and precise, waiting for someone listening in the right frequency to finally find it. Now, while one team of investigators was flying helicopters over the desert, listening for a heartbeat, another team was doing something far more ordinary. They were going to Walmart. The suspect's backpack, a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, was identified as being sold exclusively at Walmart. Sheriff Chris Nanos called the backpack one of the most promising leads in the entire case. Walmart responded by providing records of every single Ozark Trail hiker purchase made over the past several months, both online and in-store, and not just in Tucson, but across the entire country. Every single purchase, every receipt, every credit card number, every shipping address, every name. Investigators spent several days reviewing surveillance video at local Walmart locations. They were looking for a man 5'9", average build, with a black mustache buying a specific backpack at a specific point in time. Now, here is the thing about buying equipment for a crime. People think they are being careful. They pay cash. They wear a hat. They choose a store far from home. But they forget that every Walmart in America has cameras pointed at every aisle, every checkout lane, every parking lot entrance. And they forget that Walmart keeps that footage. Investigators were also tracking the gun visible in the footage. The holster appeared to be made of polyester, the kind typically used for carrying a revolver, but the weapon visible in the footage looked like a semi-automatic handgun. Authorities were contacting manufacturers and retailers to figure out who may have purchased the items. Separately, FBI agents visited several gun stores in the Tucson area carrying a list of 40 names and photographs, asking employees whether any of the individuals had been in the stores or purchased weapons. 40 names? That is not a broad, desperate sweep. That is a targeted list. Investigators do not compile 40 specific names and 40 specific photographs and walk them into gun stores one by one unless they already have a strong idea of who they are looking for. 40 names means the funnel has already narrowed. But then, as it often does in a case full of twists, the backpack lead shifted. Weeks into the investigation, Sheriff Nanos revealed that authorities were reassessing where the backpack was purchased. "We've now learned that maybe it wasn't purchased out of Walmart," Nanos told NBC News. "That backpack is new, is exclusive to Walmart, but who's to say I didn't buy it and put it on eBay?" That's what we're looking at. eBay. The second-hand market. The place where transactions happen without cameras, without receipts tied to real names, without loyalty card records. The place where a person can buy a brand new Walmart backpack from a stranger in a parking lot and pay in cash and leave no trace at all. And that one sentence, "Who's to say I didn't buy it and put it on eBay," tells you something important about how carefully this crime was prepared. Because whoever did this was thinking about exactly that. They were thinking, how do I get the supplies I need without leaving a trail back to me? That is not a panicked thought. That is a planned thought. While the pacemaker signal hummed from somewhere in the darkness and the backpack trail shifted into the second-hand market, investigators launched a third effort, one that required the help of ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Investigators put out a request to every resident within a 2-mile radius of Nancy Guthrie's home, a neighborhood near East Skyline Drive and North Campbell Avenue, in Tucson. They asked every single homeowner to submit their camera footage covering an entire month from January 1st all the way through February 2nd, the day after Nancy disappeared. A full month of footage. From hundreds of homes. Doorbell cameras, driveway cameras, garage cameras, security lights, with built-in recording, all of it requested, all of it reviewed. Why a full month? Because investigators already knew something that the public did not fully understand yet. This crime did not begin on February 1st. It began weeks before, possibly in January, possibly earlier. Someone drove through that neighborhood. Someone sat in a car and watched the house. Someone walked past the mailbox and noted what time the lights went on and off. Someone counted how many cars came and went. And maybe, just maybe, one of those families in that 2-mile radius had a camera pointed at the street. And maybe that camera captured a car that did not belong. A face that did not fit. A moment that seemed ordinary at the time, but now, in the light of everything that happened, would mean everything. Investigators were specifically asking residents to look for footage of vehicles, people, or anything deemed unusual during that time frame. Unusual. That word is doing a lot of work. Because the person who surveilled that neighborhood before February 1st was probably not unusual at the time. They probably looked like someone taking a walk. Someone making a delivery. Someone who had a reason to be on that street that felt completely normal to anyone who saw them. But on their second visit on January 11th, that date, investigators quietly flagged something was different. Something tipped the balance. Something that a camera might have caught, even if no human eye registered it as important. Now, we need to talk about someone else. Because in every true crime story, there is the person who is taken, and there is the person left behind who has to keep standing while the world watches. Savannah Guthrie has been that person. Separately, TMZ received a series of communications from a person claiming to know who the kidnapper is, who demanded a $100,000 cryptocurrency payment in exchange for the information. Think about that. While Savannah Guthrie was pleading on Instagram for her mother's return, while the family was publicly offering to pay the ransom, strangers were sending messages to celebrity gossip websites demanding cryptocurrency in exchange for tips, people exploiting a daughter's grief for digital coins. And the family kept standing anyway. Savannah Guthrie announced on Instagram that the family is offering a reward of up to $1 million payable only for the recovery of her mother. Not for information, not for tips, not for leads. For her mother. $1 million. For a woman who went to church every Sunday. Who played games with her grandchildren on Saturday nights. Who came home at 9:48 p.m. and closed her garage door 2 minutes later and had no idea that someone was already watching. The reward money grew from there. A reward of $102,500 was also being offered by 8 Crime for the arrest of the person or persons involved in Nancy's disappearance. That is more than $1 million, total, sitting on the table. Waiting for one person, just one person, who knows something, who saw something, who was told something, to decide that the money matters more than the secret. Because in cases like this, that is often how it ends, not with a dramatic forensic breakthrough, not with a pacemaker signal pinpointing a location, but with a person, someone on the edges of the plan, someone who heard a conversation they were not meant to hear, someone who was paid a small amount to do a small thing, and now realizes exactly what that small thing was, part of deciding that they have held the secret long enough. Let us step back now. Let us look at everything we have laid out across these 3 acts, and ask the question that the evidence has been quietly demanding from the beginning. What does this crime look like? It looks like planning, weeks of it, a first visit to the house, a retreat when the camera was spotted, a second visit, this time prepared with branches to cover the lens, with gloves to hide fingerprints, with a backpack to carry supplies, with a gun on the hip just in case. It looks like knowledge, not guessed knowledge, not Googled knowledge, the kind of knowledge that comes from someone who was trusted, who was close. Who knew which house on which street? Who knew the routine? Who knew that this woman would come home at 9:48 on a Saturday night and would be alone? It looks like coordination, The ransom notes were ready before the abduction was even discovered. They were sent to news outlets within hours. Someone had a plan for what happened after, not just for the night itself, but for the days that followed. And it looks like a trail. Because every piece of this plan required resources: a backpack, a gun, a vehicle, a place to hold someone, possibly a second person, or a third. And all of those resources cost money. And that money had to come from somewhere. And when it moved, when it left one account and entered another, when it changed hands in a parking lot or transferred through a phone app, it left something behind. A record. The FBI confirmed they are looking at more than one individual as a person of interest and are working through a process of elimination. More than one. That means there is a network, a small one, perhaps maybe just 2 or 3 people, but a network. And in a network, everyone knows something. And the person who knows the least is always the most nervous, and the most nervous person is always the one most likely to talk. Investigators know this. They are waiting. They are watching. And they are listening from a helicopter flying slow and low over the Tucson desert, waiting for a tiny machine the size of a $50 to send its quiet signal up into the night sky. $6 million. That is the number that stopped the country cold. A local Arizona TV station reported that the alleged kidnappers had demanded $6 million to be paid, not in cash, not in a briefcase, not in the way you see in the movies, but in Bitcoin. Cryptocurrency. Digital money that moves across the internet like a ghost. And they wanted it by 5 o'clock, Monday afternoon, or else. The 5 o'clock deadline passed without news of further contact from the alleged kidnappers. Silence. No call, no update, no confirmation. Just a deadline that came and went like a storm that threatens and then disappears without rain. But here is where this story gets complicated in a way that most people do not fully understand. Because the people behind this plan chose Bitcoin for a very specific reason. They thought it would make them invisible. They were wrong. Most people think Bitcoin is untraceable. That is the reputation. That is what criminals believe when they demand it. But here is what a cryptocurrency expert from Northeastern University told us, and this is the part that should make whoever is holding Nancy Guthrie very, very nervous. Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous, not truly anonymous. Its global reach and ease of use make it attractive in ransom schemes, but the blockchain, the public record, where every single Bitcoin transaction is stored forever, is completely transparent. Completely transparent. That means every time a Bitcoin moves from one wallet to another, that movement is recorded, permanently, on a ledger that nobody controls, that nobody can edit, and that anybody with the right tools can read. Bitcoin does not exist in physical form. It is represented as entries on the Bitcoin blockchain, a decentralized ledger used to record transactions across a network of computers. So Bitcoin is not inherently untraceable. Its blockchain is transparent and permanently recorded. Think of it like this. Imagine every dollar bill in the world had a tiny camera inside it that filmed every hand it ever passed through, every pocket it sat in, every register it came out of, every mattress it was hidden under, and imagine all of that footage was saved on a screen that anybody could watch at any time. That is what the Bitcoin blockchain is. The criminals chose it because they thought it was a shadow, but it is actually a spotlight. Now, here is the detail that made investigators lean forward very quickly. After the ransom notes were sent to media outlets demanding Bitcoin payments, there was activity in the Bitcoin account listed in the ransom note. The wallet moved. At least one transaction was made around 5 in the afternoon Arizona time, on a Tuesday to the Bitcoin address detailed in the ransom note sent to local news stations. Money went into the wallet. Now, who sent it? Was it the family? Was it law enforcement running a test? Was it a random person online who had read about the case and wanted to help? Was it something else entirely? Investigators did not say. But here is what that single transaction did, regardless of who sent it. It activated the trail. A blockchain forensics expert said it clearly. The moment a wallet address appears, investigators have something actionable. Funds can be tracked in real time, associations identified, and networks mapped in ways that are impossible with bulk cash or informal value transfer systems. Real time. That means the second money touches that wallet, investigators are watching. They are not waiting for a report. They are not waiting for a court order. They are watching the blockchain in real time, following every move the money makes, mapping every connection it touches. And the people who planned this crime are discovering something they did not fully understand when they wrote those ransom notes. You cannot hide in the blockchain. Now, the people behind this almost certainly know something about cryptocurrency. They chose it deliberately. They know it has a reputation for anonymity. And they probably know about the tricks criminals use to try to hide their tracks. One technique is called chain hopping, moving money rapidly between different types of cryptocurrency to make it harder to follow. It has been linked to transnational crime networks. Another technique is called mixing, in which users bundle their transaction together with dozens of others, making it harder to tell who sent what. One such service, Tornado Cash, drew federal scrutiny and was later sued over money laundering allegations. Chain hopping, mixing, bouncing money between currencies, between continents, between wallets with no names attached. It sounds clever. It is not clever enough, because here is what the FBI's Financial Crimes Division does that most people never hear about. They do not just follow the money forward where it goes after the crime. They follow it backward, all the way back to the very beginning, back to where it came from, before the crime ever happened, back to the account that funded the planning, back to the person who bought the backpack, who paid for the surveillance trips, who put gas in the car that drove through that neighborhood in January. Investigators said, crypto has changed the economics and incentives behind ransom and extortion by increasing speed and reach. But it has also given law enforcement and national security teams unprecedented visibility. Unprecedented visibility. That is a careful phrase. It means we can see things now that we could never see before. And the people running this plan did not fully understand that when they chose Bitcoin as their currency. Now, here is a detail that matters enormously to the shape of this investigation, because not all of the ransom notes were real. A second ransom note was conclusively found to be fake and led to the arrest of the sender. But for now, authorities appeared to be treating the original KGUN-9 note as plausible. One fake note, one arrest. And that arrest tells you something important. It tells you that investigators are not just looking at the big picture, the helicopters, the pacemaker signals, the FBI task forces. They are also tracking every single communication that claims to be connected to this case, every note, every email, every anonymous tip, every social media message. Because sometimes the fake notes lead somewhere real. Sometimes the person who sends the fake note is not random at all. Sometimes they know something. Sometimes they are connected, maybe distantly, maybe indirectly, to the people who are actually holding Nancy Guthrie. And then there was the third note. A third ransom note was sent to TMZ containing a legitimate Bitcoin address, but it was a different address than the one provided in the notes sent to the Arizona news stations. A different address. That means either there are multiple people sending notes, a chaotic, disorganized operation where different members of the network are acting independently, or someone completely separate from the kidnapping is trying to use Nancy Guthrie's disappearance to steal money from a desperate family. Or both. And somewhere in the middle of all of that noise, investigators are trying to find the one signal that is real. Here is the quiet detail that one retired FBI agent noticed, the kind of detail that seems small but might mean everything. One retired FBI agent told the New York Post that the ransom note had an unusual characteristic. It included the term USD for dollars. He said an American would be unlikely to use that term. The former agent suggested this could mean the kidnappers may be from overseas, or that the note is a hoax. USD. Think about how you talk about money. You say dollars. You say $6 million. You do not say 6 million USD. That is how someone writes it when English is not their first language. That is how someone writes it when they learned American currency from a textbook or from a financial document, rather than from growing up here. One word, 3 letters, and it shifts the entire geography of this case. Because if the person or people who wrote this note are not American, if this operation has an international component, then the question of who sold the information about Nancy Guthrie becomes much larger than a neighbor or a prost, staff member or a business contact. It becomes a question about networks, about who, in what country, connected to what organization, had a reason to look at Savannah Guthrie's family and decide that her 84-year-old mother in Tucson, Arizona, was worth $6 million. Savannah Guthrie said she blamed herself for her mother's kidnapping. She acknowledged that Nancy was likely targeted because of her fame and presumed fortune. She blamed herself, a daughter, whose only crime was working hard, whose only mistake was becoming successful, who spent years building a career, becoming a face that millions of Americans woke up to every morning, and who now carries the weight of wondering whether the very thing she worked so hard for is the reason her mother is gone. Savannah also reflected on seeing the doorbell footage from Nancy's front door, saying she wakes up every night thinking about her mom, seeing the masked man above her bed before she was taken away. Above her bed, Nancy Guthrie woke up, or perhaps she never fully woke up, and the last thing she saw in her own home, in the place where she was supposed to be safe, was a masked stranger standing over her. And her daughter watches that footage, again and again, every night. That is the real cost of this crime, not the $6 million, not the Bitcoin wallets, not the investigation budget. The real cost is a daughter who cannot sleep, who blames herself, who would give every dollar she has ever earned to bring her mother home. Despite a $1 million reward for anyone with information that brings Nancy home, there has been no break in the case. Savannah says she and her family are in the dark. In the dark. $1 million on the table, and still, the person who knows something has not yet decided to come forward. But investigators believe that moment is coming. Because here is the thing about money: when it moves, when it is demanded, when it is transferred, when it changes hands across a digital ledger, it leaves a shadow. And that shadow does not fade over time. It does not wash off in the rain. It does not disappear just because weeks go by, and the news cycle moves on to other stories. The blockchain is permanent. The DNA on the property is in a lab right now. The pacemaker is still pulsing. And the financial trail, the money that moved before the crime, to fund the planning, to buy the equipment, to pay the people involved, that trail is being traced backward, day by day, transaction by transaction, name by name. Investigators confirmed that they are following the financial evidence in real time and mapping associations that are impossible to hide. Hired means a deal was made. Deals have two sides. And the people who think they are watching investigators from a safe distance do not fully understand that investigators have already started watching back. We are in agony. We are in agony. Those are the words Savannah Guthrie said on camera, 54 days after her mother disappeared. Not composed, not rehearsed, not the polished, professional delivery of a woman who has spent her whole career speaking calmly into a camera. Just a daughter, breaking. It is unbearable, and to think of what she went through. I wake up every night in the middle of the night, every night, and in the darkness, I imagine her terror, and it is unthinkable. But those thoughts demand to be thought. Those thoughts demand to be thought. That sentence tells you everything about what it means to love someone who has been taken. You do not get to choose not to think about it. The thoughts come whether you want them or not. In the middle of the night, in the darkness, they come. And a daughter who has spent her career telling other people's stories now lives inside a story that she cannot report her way out of, cannot anchor her way through, cannot fix with the right words or the right question. She can only ache, and wonder, and wait, Here is what the calendar looks like as of today, March 26th, 2026. 54 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. More than a month since law enforcement held a news conference to discuss the case publicly. The investigation has reached what reporters on the ground are calling an unexpected standstill. I don't think any of us expected to pretty much feel like we're back at square one at this point in the investigation, said Brianna Whitney, a reporter who has covered this case from the very beginning. Back at square one. Those words are hard to hear, but here is what an experienced investigator will tell you about silence in a case like this. Silence is not always failure. A retired FBI supervisory special agent said he wants to be hopeful that the silence is because they're onto something. Onto something? Because there is a difference between a case that has gone cold and a case that has gone quiet. A cold case has run out of leads. A quiet case is one where investigators have found something they are not ready to talk about yet. Something they do not want to say out loud until the moment is exactly right. Until the net is in position. Until the door is ready to close. Harry Trombitas, a former special agent for the FBI, said authorities are likely to continue as long as there is an investigation to conduct. As long as there is an investigation to conduct, that is not a man describing a case that is dying. That is a man describing a case that is patient. Now, here is the newest development, the theory that emerged quietly in the final weeks of this investigation, and that changes the shape of everything. Investigators are looking into a theory that the masked person seen on the doorbell camera was not the only one inside that night. He may have been waiting on the outside to help an accomplice get Nancy Guthrie out the front door. Read that again. The person on the camera, the person in the mask, with the backpack, with the gun on his hip, may not have been the one who went inside at all. There may have been a second person, someone who went in through another entrance. Someone who moved through that house in the dark while their partner waited at the front door. Someone who knew the layout. Someone who knew where Nancy's bedroom was. Someone who knew how to move quietly through a home they had studied, or visited, or perhaps in some way already been inside. The FBI has returned to the neighborhood multiple times to ask residents about former neighbors who moved out shortly before Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Agents also asked residents to provide the names of construction workers and contractors who had been working on a nearby house under construction. Former neighbors who moved out shortly before the abduction. Construction workers and contractors at a nearby property. These are people with legitimate reasons to be in the neighborhood. People whose faces would not have raised alarm. People who could park on that street, walk past that house, observe the routine, and nobody would think twice. People who were trusted, or at least, people who appeared to belong. Law enforcement sources told CBS News that additional security cameras at Nancy Guthrie's home, one on a fence at the back of the house, one showing the driveway and garage, captured images of family members, landscapers and pool workers stretching back weeks prior to the kidnapping. Landscapers, pool workers, contractors, neighbors. All of those people had access to that property in the weeks before February 1st. All of them could have seen something or been seen by someone who was watching them, learning from them, building a picture of the home and the woman who lived inside it. And investigators have the footage, weeks of it, frame by frame, face by face. They are looking at every single person in it. This is the concept that experienced investigators call the planning gap. And it is the most important thing this documentary has to say. The planning gap is the space between when someone decides to commit a crime and when they actually do it. In that space, in those days or weeks of preparation, people are the least careful they will ever be. Because they do not know yet that anyone will be looking. They do not know yet that investigators will eventually dig backward through their movements, their purchases, their communications, their digital footprints. They think they only need to be careful on the night of the crime. But investigators do not just look at the night of the crime. They look at January 11th. They look at the weeks before that. They look at every car that drove through that neighborhood between January 1st and February 2nd. They look at every purchase made to prepare for what happened, every phone call, Every text message that was sent and then deleted, because deleted messages leave traces too, in the logs of cell towers and the metadata of apps that the sender never thought about. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that investigators now believe something may have happened weeks before Nancy Guthrie vanished. They are actively exploring possible incidents in the weeks before the abduction. Weeks before? That is where the case lives. Not on February 1st. Not in the 41 minutes between the camera going dark and the pacemaker going silent. But in the quiet, ordinary, seemingly innocent days that led up to it. And here is the thing about the planning gap that the people behind this crime did not fully understand. Nervous people cover their tracks going forward. They delete the messages from the day after the crime. They hide the things they bought for the night of. But they almost always forget to go backward. They forget to clean up the planning. They forget that the trip they took to the neighborhood 3 weeks earlier was captured on a camera they did not even know was there. They forget that the phone they used to make one call in January was pinging a cell tower that recorded the location. They forget that the money they moved to fund the preparation left a shadow in a bank statement or a blockchain ledger. The planning gap is where people get caught. Investigators have questioned contractors, landscapers, and anyone else who had access to Guthrie's home. No leading theory has been officially confirmed, but the investigation has not stopped. It has not stopped. Over 1,500 potential leads have come into the FBI since the Guthrie family announced the $1 million reward. 1,500 tips. Most of them will lead nowhere. That is the reality of tip lines in high-profile cases. People call because they want to help. People call because they think they saw something. People call because they have a gut feeling that someone they know is involved and they are not sure if they are right, but they cannot stop thinking about it. And inside those 1,500 calls, investigators believe at least one of them is real. At least one person has picked up the phone and said something that is now being quietly, carefully, patiently followed. Savannah Guthrie posted on Instagram, writing directly to the public. Someone knows how to find our mom and bring her home. Someone knows. Not might know, not possibly knows, knows. Because that is the nature of this crime. It required people. It required planning. It required information that traveled from one person to another. And every time information travels, every time a secret moves from the person who holds it to the person who needs it, it leaves a witness behind. The person who sold the information knows they sold it. The person who received it knows they received it. And if there was a third person, a driver, a lookout, a contact, who helped arrange the logistics, they know what they know too. None of those people can unknow what they know. They can stay silent. They can hope. They can tell themselves that the investigators are looking in the wrong direction. But they cannot make the knowledge go away. And knowledge, held under pressure, for a long time, in a case that the entire country is watching, eventually finds a way out. Right now, as you watch this documentary, these things are happening simultaneously. DNA recovered from the scene is still being analyzed. Investigators have turned to forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified Brian Kohberger, the man who killed 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 inches hopes of breaking the case open. The pacemaker is still sending its signal, every 2 to 3 minutes, in whatever room, whatever building, whatever corner of Arizona, or beyond where Nancy Guthrie is being held, patient, faithful, waiting for the right device and the right frequency to finally hear it. The family continues to plead. "We miss our mom with every breath," the Guthrie siblings said, "and we cannot be at peace until she is home. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder." They cannot grieve. They can only ache and wonder. And investigators, the ones who do not appear on television, the ones who work in silence, in labs, in offices, in helicopters flying low over the desert in the early morning hours, they are still working. Savannah Guthrie's brother Cameron, who spent his career in the military and worked in intelligence, knew from the very first phone call what had happened to his mother. He said, "I think she's been kidnapped for ransom," Savannah recalled. He knew immediately. Because people who understand how the world works at its darkest edges recognize the shape of a planned crime when they see it, and the people who understand how investigations work at their deepest level recognize something else. This case is not cold. This case is quiet. Here is what the evidence tells us, all of it together, laid end to end. Nancy Guthrie was not taken by accident. She was not taken by a random stranger who happened to choose her house on a random night. She was targeted, specifically, deliberately, over a period of weeks, by someone who knew where she lived, by someone who was paid or promised something to make this happen, by someone who believed that Savannah Guthrie's fame meant that her family had money and that an 84-year-old woman living alone in the Arizona hills was the easiest way to reach it. But here is what that person or those people did not fully understand when they made that calculation. They chose the wrong family. Because the Guthrie family does not go quiet. They stand in front of cameras with tears on their faces and they ask the whole world to help them. They lay yellow flowers on their mother's porch. They issue statements every week, reminding Tucson, reminding Arizona, reminding the entire country that Nancy Guthrie is still out there and that somebody knows something. And they chose the wrong case. Because this case has the FBI's full attention. It has genetic genealogy labs working through mixed DNA samples. It has a pacemaker sending a Bluetooth signal that investigators are still hunting. It has a blockchain ledger showing every movement of every Bitcoin in that ransom wallet. It has 1,500 tips and counting. It has the White House posting about it on social media. It has a retired general's son who recognized a ransom kidnapping in the first 60 seconds of a phone call. And it has one thing that every criminal fears most of all: time. Because investigators do not give up on cases like this. They get more careful. They get more methodical. They follow the planning gap backward, week by week, looking for the moment when someone made a decision. They run the DNA through genealogy databases that grow every single day as more people mail in their saliva samples to learn about their family history. They listen for the pacemaker. They watch the blockchain. And they wait for the one person at the edges of this crime who is not sleeping, who is checking the news every morning, who thought they were far enough away from what happened that night to be safe to finally decide that the weight of what they know is heavier than the risk of saying it out loud. Someone knows something, Savannah Guthrie wrote. It may be the key. Someone does know. And hired means a deal was made. Deals have two sides. And the investigators following the money, the DNA, the signal, and the silence are getting closer to finding both of them. If you have any information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, please contact Pima County Sheriff's Department, tip line 520-351-4900, FBI tip line 1800C, LLFBI 1-800-225-5324. The Guthrie family is offering a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to her recovery. Nancy, come home.